All right, so here we go. Let's look at how we're going to EQ this project here. So of course, we're looking at searching. You've already had a chance to kind of listen to what you're working with here. So what we're going to do is solo this kick. So whatever instrument that you're working on, go ahead and solo it and then loop an area. Now again, the way that you loop is you make sure you're on the top half of any given track. So when you're on the bottom half, you see this little hand here. When you're on the top half, you see the selector tool. Just left click and drag. Now in order to make sure it's looping, go over to your floating transport bar. Make sure you see this little loop around the play button. If you don't, then you want to right click on that. Let me stop this really fast. You want to right click on that and make sure this loop is checked. And that way you will ensure that you are looping this particular section. So I'll play it again. Now, let me get rid of that really quick. So now when you go and look at each track, you will see a column called inserts, and you'll just have inserts A through E right here. In fact, let me get rid of the F through J really quick. All right, so you have A through E. So you're going to left click on this first slot, go to plugin, go to EQ, and go down to EQ3 7 band. So this is right here. This is the equalizer we're going to be using. So it's called a 7 band EQ because there are 7 different areas that you have an opportunity to manipulate the frequencies on. Okay, but we're going to start out with this first area, which is the high pass filter. The first thing we want to do is we want to turn it on. Once you turn it on, you're going to see some movement over here on the graphical area of the equalizer. All right, and you have 2 settings here. You have the Q setting, which dictates how steep this slope is here, and we'll look at that in a second. And you have the frequency setting. So this is just going to be a formula you're going to use for every track. Put the frequency on 40 hertz, just like that. Take the Q, move that Q up to 24 decibels. Now you can see as I move that Q up, you can see how that slope gets steeper and steeper. Now the way that I'm doing that is I'm left clicking, I'm holding down, and I'm pushing up with the mouse, and that'll make this Q go to the right. All right, so you can see now what I've done is I've I've cut off everything under 40 hertz. And if you remember, those frequencies at around 30 hertz, we hear them as just rumble. So we can get rid of everything under 40 hertz there. So then we're done with our high pass filter. And again, this is what a high pass filter does. It takes everything higher than your frequency and lets it pass unaffected. Everything under that frequency basically gets filtered out. All right. Now we're going to move right over to the low pass filter now. Right. And again, we want to turn it on. Right. And once we turn it on, we see some activity happening over here. We're going to put our frequency at 15,000. And then our Q, again, we're going to take it to 24 decibels. Again, by left clicking the knob and pushing up. And so you can see now you've got your lowest frequencies filtered off, everything under 40 hertz. Your highest frequencies filtered out as well, everything over 15K or 15,000 hertz. Now that's the start. That's what every single track is going to look like. Now we're going to go down and we're going to cut our mud now. Now we've got 5 more bands that we could potentially manipulate, but we need to go to that band that's closest to 300 hertz. And so the band that's closest is this low mid frequency band. And right now it's at 200. Now for mud, we're going to sweep between 250 and 350. So I'll go ahead and I'll set my frequency at 250 to start with, right? I'm going to put my Q at 1.5. If you remember Q on these bell curves, and so these bell curves, they kind of look like a bell, right? If you boost them, they look like a bell. If you cut them, they look kind of like a valley. So the Q of 1.5 is a little bit more narrow than where the Q was at 1. So remember, the lower this Q number, the wider this frequency band. The higher this Q, the more narrow. And because we ultimately are going to cut mud, then we want to have a more narrow band here. So what we will do is sweep. We'll start at about 250. And so this orange, this graph is color coded. They have these dots here. So this is the orange dot. So it's going to coordinate with this band right here, which is orange. So I'll start at about 250 and I'll look at this number here, but then I'll take my mouse and I'll sweep and I'll go between 250 and 350. And I'm kind of listening for where does this particular sound seem more muddy or more muffled to me. So I'm sweeping. So closer to 350, it doesn't sound as muddy to me as it does down closer to about 250. So I think at about 260 or so is where this sounds the most muddy. So now I'll come down to my gain knob and I'll pull it down. And what I want to do is I want to cut the mud by anywhere from -4 to -6 decibels. So I'll just put it right in the middle, about -5. And I can bypass this bypass button. Give it a quick listen. Sometimes it's going to be very difficult to hear the difference between bypassing it and not bypassing it, especially early on. It's going to take a little time for your ears to develop. But if you don't hear it at, say, -5 dB, go ahead and take it down to -6 dB and see if you can hear that difference. All right. So, but once you have done this, so you've got your high pass filter, your low pass filter, and you've cut the mud, and you're going to follow this pattern on every single track for your first EQ. Once you've done this, you're finished with your first EQ, which is our subtractive EQ. You can close that out. And then you're going to come back over to your inserts column. You're going to skip the next row. And then you're going to go to the third row. You're going to add another EQ 3/7 band. All right, so here's our next EQ 3/7 band. So this is going to be our additive EQ, right? This is where we're going to go ahead and boost the sweet spot, boost the frequency that is going to bring out kind of the best in each individual sound. And so you have that chart. And so this is a kick. So based on that chart, you know that the kick sweet spot is at about 100 hertz. So we'll look again at our bands and we'll see which one is closest to 100 hertz. So we see here, the low frequency is closest to 100 hertz. So I can go up here and I can start to boost, but when I do that, I see a little different shape over here, okay? So this is actually a low shelf. So if I look over here at the low frequency area, I can see that the symbol that is selected is the low shelf. What a low shelf does is everything below that frequency, right, gets boosted by the same amount. Or if I were to cut on a low shelf, everything under that frequency gets cut. We don't want to use shelving EQs. So I'm going to change the symbol to this peaking filter. And so the peaking filter looks like the bell curve that we are looking for. Now, the same thing is true on the high frequency side. By default, the high frequency side is set to a shelf, to a high shelf. If you are boosting frequencies in the high range, right? So for your hi-hats and cymbals, make sure you change that symbol to a bell curve. All right. So back over to our kick. We'll start at about 100 hertz. We'll boost. And we're just going to sweep a little bit. We'll sweep between, say, 90 hertz and 100 hertz. And I'm listening for where that kick thumps, you know. So closer to 90, it's kind of a little more bottomy sounding, right? As I get closer to 110, definitely a little more thumpy, I would say. And you want to be sure when you're sweeping, be extreme. Turn that daggone thing up and then sweep, right? Because you really will hear subtle differences better when you really turn up the volume and you go, you know, and sweep between frequencies. So I think a little over 100 is fine for me. I'll come down to the gain. I'll boost it. I'll just turn this up by about anywhere from 3 to 4 dB. So when you're boosting on the low end, all right, When you're boosting on the low end, you only want to boost somewhere between 3 and 4 dB. When you're boosting on the mid range, which I'd say about 1K and higher, you can boost between 4 to 6 decibels. But make sure you bypass and then take the bypass off to hear the before and after. Because if you hear the results, right, that you're looking for, there's no reason to turn it up more than you need to. And that's pretty much what you're going to do for every track. All right, do your first EQ, which is subtractive, your second EQ, which is additive. You're going to do that for all 8 tracks. All right, have fun.